Introduction. Friends, if you want to watch the highly anticipated movie Snow White, 2025, in English, then you should definitely like this video. And if you're visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on exciting updates. In today's video, we're going to talk all about the upcoming fantasy adventure Snow White, 2025. We'll cover what this movie is all about, where you can watch it, and all the fascinating details behind the making of this film. I'm going to tell you which OTT platform or satellite channel will be streaming this movie, so stay tuned for that. We'll dive into the technical side, from the music department to pre-production, filming, post-production, budget details, and expected box office performance. We'll also explore the story, give you a short review of the plot, and talk about the cast, the actors' performances, and which stars are playing which iconic roles. So, friends, I request you to watch this video all the way to the end because we have a lot of interesting facts, insights, and behind-the-scenes stories lined up for you. Let's get started. Plot and narrative. Snow White, 2025. Alright, friends, let's dive deep into the magical world of Snow White, 2025. Not with a stiff, formal review, but like we're sitting around telling each other an exciting story. So, how does Snow White, 2025, unfold? Well, it takes the familiar fairy tale you think you know and flips it into something darker, grander, and far more unpredictable. Sure, we still begin with Snow White herself, the innocent princess, her skin pale as snow, lips red as blood, hair black as night. But from the very opening, the film signals it's going to play with tone. This is no sweet, gentle bedtime story. The atmosphere is intense, moody, and cinematic, pulling you into a world that feels lived in and dangerous. We open with the kingdom in crisis, the queen's iron grip tightening, her dark magic infecting the land. But here's where the film gets playful. It doesn't just stick with Snow White's perspective. We jump into the minds of several characters, the queens, the huntsmans, even one or two of the dwarfs, who, by the way, aren't your standard comic relief sidekicks here. They're fleshed out, complicated figures with their own backstories. This shifting perspective creates tension. We see the queen plotting and seething. We see the huntsman torn between duty and conscience. We see the dwarfs debating whether to help this mysterious runaway princess or turn her away to protect themselves. The narrative plays with time, too. We get flashbacks of the queen's rise to power, her envy slowly morphing into cruelty, giving her more dimension than the simple evil stepmother stereotype. We also glimpse Snow White's memories of her father, her lost childhood, and what shaped her resilience. These moments are woven into the present-day story, so you're constantly piecing together who these people are and why they act the way they do. Now, let's talk key turning points. First, the classic mirror scene. But here, the mirror isn't just a prop. It's practically a character, whispering, tempting, manipulating the queen. Then comes the huntsman's betrayal. Or is it? His decision to spare Snow White's life becomes a much bigger, more emotional moment, loaded with guilt and fear. Halfway through, the story takes a sharp turn. Snow White doesn't just hide away in the forest, waiting. No, she starts fighting back. She trains, she gathers allies, and she begins to understand the depth of the queen's magic. The dwarfs become not just helpers but mentors, each teaching her something she'll need for the final confrontation. The climactic sequence is a storm of emotions and action. Snow White facing the queen not just as a scared girl, but as a leader who's learned sacrifice, loss, and bravery. And the film doesn't shy away from darker themes. Betrayal, obsession, power, and the cost of revenge are all woven through the final act. By the end, the narrative has taken you on a journey that feels both familiar and totally fresh. It's not just good versus evil. It's about identity, choice, and transformation. And the emotional punch? It's not just about Snow White defeating the queen. It's about her discovering who she is beyond the mirror, beyond the crown, beyond the fairy tale. So, friends, buckle up for a Snow White that doesn't just tell you a story. It pulls you into a living, breathing world where every choice matters and every character has a role to play. It's going to be one wild, thrilling ride. Would you like me to break down the characters' roles next? Character development. Snow White, 2025. Alright, friends, let's really dig into the heart of Snow White, 2025. The characters. Because this movie doesn't just ride on flashy visuals or a well-known title. It's the characters who pull you in, shake you up, and make you feel like you're living this dark fairy tale alongside them. Let's start, of course, with Snow White herself. Forget the old image of a delicate, passive princess waiting for someone to save her. This Snow White is fierce, layered, and vulnerable all at once. When we meet her, she's been shaped by years of fear under the Queen's rule, but she's not broken. She's observant, smart, and full of bottled-up anger. What's fascinating is how her journey isn't just about survival. It's about awakening. She starts off unsure, running from danger, but as the film unfolds, you watch her reclaim her voice, her confidence, and ultimately her destiny. Every scene pushes her closer to discovering her strength, and by the end, she's no longer a girl in a fairy tale. She's a force to be reckoned with. Now, the Queen. Oh, what a deliciously complex villain. She's not just jealous because Snow White is prettier. That would be too flat. No, this Queen is written with layers of pain, ambition, and insecurity. We see flashbacks of her early life, hints of betrayal and disappointment that hardened her. She craves control not just over the kingdom, but over how she's seen, how she's remembered. Her relationship with the mirror is fascinating. It's almost like she's in a toxic, codependent relationship with her own reflection. And her arc. She spirals, unraveling bit by bit, until her final confrontation with Snow White feels not just like a battle, but a tragic collapse. The Huntsman is another standout. He's not just the rugged side character who shows up, does his part, and disappears. In this version, the Huntsman has his own arc, his own inner conflicts. He's torn between loyalty to the Queen, who holds power over him, and his growing guilt over carrying out her dark deeds. His decision to spare Snow White's life is a pivotal turning point, not just for the plot, but for him as a man. It forces him to reckon with who he is and what kind of legacy he's leaving behind. Throughout the movie, you watch him shift from reluctant participant to active ally, and it adds a real emotional weight to his scenes. And let's not forget the dwarfs, who, by the way, are not cute background figures in this version. Each dwarf has a distinct personality, backstory, and reason for living on the fringes of society. There's the gruff leader who's lost faith in the world, the sharp-tongued one who masks pain with sarcasm, the quiet thinker who studies ancient magic. As Snow White earns their trust, you watch these rough, guarded characters soften, open up, and become part of something bigger. Their bond with her feels earned, not just thrown in for laughs or convenience. Even the mirror feels like a character. It's not just a passive object reflecting back answers. It whispers, it tempts, it twists the Queen's mind. Its presence haunts the story, shaping both the Queen's downfall and Snow White's rise. What's fun about all these character arcs is how interconnected they are. Snow White's growth pushes the Huntsman to confront his own choices. The Queen's obsession pushes everyone toward a breaking point. The dwarf's hidden histories add depth and urgency to the quest. Every relationship matters. Every motivation drives the plot forward. And by the end, you're not just watching characters move through a story. You feel their triumphs, their heartbreaks, their hard-won transformations. Want me to break down the key relationships between them next? Performances. Snow White, 2025. Alright, friends, let's talk about what really makes the magic of Snow White, 2025, hit the screen. The performances. Because let's be honest, even the best-written script and the most dazzling visuals are nothing without actors who can breathe fire, heart, and raw emotion into their roles. And oh, does this cast deliver? First up, let's shine the spotlight on our Snow White. The actress here doesn't just play a wide-eyed princess, she owns the role. From the first moment she appears on screen, there's a spark in her eyes, a mix of vulnerability and simmering strength that instantly makes you root for her. She doesn't just act scared or brave or heartbroken. She lets you feel every beat of her journey. One moment, she's trembling with fear in the shadows. The next, she's standing tall, facing down danger with a fierceness that sends chills. And the best part? She's not polished or perfect. You see her struggle, stumble, doubt herself, and that makes her transformation all the more powerful. Now, onto the Queen. Oh, what a performance! This actress does not play the villain like a cartoonish, cackling witch. No, she's regal poised, and so icy she can freeze the air with just a glance. But here's the genius. She plays the Queen's cracks. You see the flicker of insecurity behind the confidence, the rage barely hidden under the cool surface. She delivers her lines with such intensity that even in quiet scenes, you're holding your breath. Her chemistry with a mirror, yes, even acting opposite a mirror, is electric, like she's locked in a dangerous dance with her own reflection.
The huntsman?
He's not just the rugged, tough guy here. This actor brings layers of inner conflict. You see the weariness in his face, the flicker of guilt in his eyes, the tension in his every movement. He gives the huntsman a bruised humanity that makes his scenes with Snow White surprisingly tender and emotional. When he's torn between following orders and doing what's right, you can feel that pull inside him. And when he finally takes a stand, it's not just an action moment. It's a deeply emotional payoff. The dwarfs are a treat, too. Each actor makes their character distinct, not by falling into goofy stereotypes, but by giving them heart and personality. There's the gruff one with a surprisingly soft side, the sarcastic one who hides his pain behind jokes, the wise one who radiates quiet strength. Their scenes with Snow White are some of the most emotionally satisfying in the film because the actors bring such authenticity. You believe these are real, weathered people who've lived through hardship and found family in each other. Even the minor characters shine. Whether it's the Queen's advisors, the villagers, or the magical beings that appear along the way, every supporting actor adds to the tapestry of the world. There's no throwaway performance here. Everyone seems to know they're part of something bigger, and they bring their A game. And let's not forget the physical performances. The fight scenes, the escapes, the confrontations. The actors don't just swing swords or run through forests. They embody the exhaustion, the panic, the adrenaline. When Snow White faces off against the Queen in the final act, it's not just a battle of magic. It's a clash of wills, powered by the raw intensity both actresses bring to the moment. Watching Snow White, 2025, you don't just see characters on a screen. You feel their heartbreak, their triumphs, their fears, and their hopes. The cast doesn't just act. They pull you right into the story, making every moment pulse with life. Want me to describe the visual style or atmosphere next? Direction: Snow White, 2025. Alright, friends, now we step behind the curtain. Let's talk about the director, the mastermind pulling all the strings behind Snow White, 2025. This is where things get really fascinating because the director doesn't just tell the story, they shape how you feel every second you're watching it. First, let's talk tone. From the very first frame, the director sets a mood that grabs you by the collar. Dark, atmospheric, almost gothic, but never grim for the sake of it. The movie feels like a living, breathing fairy tale, one with teeth. You can tell the director wanted this to feel grounded in emotion, not just spectacle. So while we get sweeping forest landscapes and chilling castle corridors, what really lands are the intimate moments. The quiet scenes where Snow White is silently grieving, or the Queen is whispering to the mirror in a near-empty chamber, her voice barely audible but heavy with menace. Stylistically, there are so many unique choices that give the film its edge. For example, the camera work is often deliberately close and personal during emotional scenes. We're right up in the characters' faces, seeing every flicker of doubt, every tear, every clenched jaw. But when the magic kicks in, the director pulls back and lets the frame expand, capturing the full, majestic, and sometimes terrifying, scale of the world. There are moments when the screen explodes with light and shadow, when you almost feel like you're inside a painting. A visual feast that doesn't just look good but feels meaningful. The pacing is another triumph. This isn't a rushed, let's hit every plot point kind of movie, nor does it drag in endless setup. The director builds tension carefully. Early on, things are slow and simmering. You're watching the Queen's power tighten, you're seeing Snow White's desperation grow. But once the huntsman spares Snow White, the pace accelerates, pushing the characters toward confrontation. And by the final act, it's full throttle, edge-of-your-seat momentum. The director balances action and emotion so skillfully that even during the biggest battles, the heart of the story never gets lost. Oh, and let's not forget the visual symbolism scattered throughout. The director layers in little touches that enrich the experience. The way mirrors are framed in shots, how light and shadow dance in key moments, how color palettes shift depending on Snow White's emotional state. When Snow White is lost and alone, the world around her feels cold and muted. When she rises into her own power, the colors sharpen, the shadows thin, and you see her transformation as much as you feel it. Even the narrative perspective is handled with flair. Remember how I mentioned that we jump between different characters' viewpoints? That's not easy to pull off, but the director makes sure every shift feels purposeful. We're not bouncing around aimlessly. We're being guided through a rich, layered world where every character matters, every choice resonates. And the action scenes? Let me tell you, they're not just noise and chaos. The director stages them with a clear eye. Every blow, every escape, every spell cast is choreographed not just for thrill but for story. When Snow White faces off against the Queen, you're not just watching a magic duel. You're seeing years of pain, anger, and determination explode on screen. In short, friends, the director of Snow White, 2025, doesn't just deliver a movie, they craft an experience. Every frame, every beat, every pause is carefully chosen to pull you deeper into this world, to make you feel like you're walking through a fairy tale that's as dangerous as it is beautiful. Want me to break down the visual effects or world building next? Cinematography, Snow White, 2025. Alright, friends, buckle up, because now we're diving into the cinematography of Snow White, 2025. And let me tell you, this is where the movie becomes pure visual poetry. The camera doesn't just show you the story, it pulls you inside it. From the very start, the cinematographer sets a visual tone that wraps you up like a cloak. Imagine towering, ancient forests with mist curling between the trees, shafts of moonlight slicing through the darkness, and close-ups so intimate you can see the glisten of a tear or the tremble of a lip. The way the camera frames these moments creates an immediate connection. You're not just watching Snow White run through the woods, you're running right alongside her, heart pounding in your chest. Let's talk camera angles. The film plays with perspective in a way that's both thrilling and meaningful. When Snow White is feeling powerless or trapped, the camera tilts down on her, making her small against the vast, intimidating world. But as she grows stronger, the framing changes. Suddenly, we're looking up at her, feeling her presence fill the screen. During confrontations, especially with the Queen, the angles become tight and tense. Faces framed in sharp close-up, eyes locked, tension crackling between them like a live wire. Then there's the lighting, which deserves its own standing ovation. The movie is drenched in contrasts. Dark, shadowy corners where danger lurks and soft, golden glows where hope flickers. In the Queen's palace, the lighting is cold, silver, and sharp, casting long, elegant shadows that make everything feel both beautiful and deadly. Out in the wild, we get earthy, natural tones, sunlight breaking through trees, campfire embers dancing on Snow White's face, the eerie glow of magical creatures moving through the night. Every lighting choice shapes the mood, guiding your emotions scene by scene. Now, for the framing, this is where the cinematographer shows off. There are moments when the screen feels like a moving painting. Snow White standing alone on a cliff, her silhouette framed by a blood-red sunset, the Queen surrounded by towering mirrors, her reflection fractured a dozen times, symbolizing her crumbling grip on herself. The dwarfs huddled together in the warmth of their underground home, the camera catching the flicker of candlelight on their weathered faces. These shots don't just look gorgeous, they tell you something about where the characters are emotionally. And let's not forget the visually striking moments. There's a chase through the forest where the camera weaves between trees with dizzying speed, making you feel the chaos and fear. There's a magical transformation scene where the visuals shift from tight focus to sweeping wide shots, showing the full scale of the magic unleashed. There's the final battle, where light and shadow clash so intensely that the entire screen seems to pulse. A visual representation of the power struggle at the heart of the story. The cinematography also plays a huge role in building atmosphere and tension. In the quieter moments, the camera lingers, holding a shot just a second longer than you expect, making you squirm with anticipation. In the action scenes, it moves with purpose, not jerky or chaotic, but smooth and deliberate, letting you feel every movement, every shift in momentum. In short, the cinematography of Snow White, 2025, doesn't just decorate the story, it breathes life into it. Every angle, every shadow, every flicker of light pulls you deeper into this dark, gorgeous fairy tale world. Want me to explore the music and sound design next? Editing and pacing. Snow White, 2025. Alright, friends, let's crack open the hidden engine of Snow White, 2025. The editing and pacing, because trust me, this is the heartbeat that keeps the whole story alive and pulsing. Editing, you see, isn't just about cutting scenes together. It's about shaping the rhythm of the entire experience, deciding when to hold your breath and when to let it out, when to let the camera linger and when to snap you forward. And in this film, the editor knows exactly how to play that game. Let's start with the flow. Right from the opening, the movie sweeps you up. The opening sequences are tightly woven, sharp cuts between Snow White's isolated life, the Queen's cold, glittering palace, and the huntsman's grim tasks. You're instantly pulled into three parallel threads, and the editing moves between them with such smooth precision that you never feel lost or jerked around. The transitions, often marked by visual echoes, like a match cut from a reflection in a puddle to the gleam of a mirror, create a sense of cohesion. It's like three rivers flowing into the same wild sea. But what really makes the editing sing is its emotional pacing. In the quieter, more intimate scenes, when Snow White mourns her father, or when the dwarfs tell their stories by the fire, the editor lets the moments breathe. The cuts slow down, the shots linger just long enough for us to sit with the characters' grief, their hope, their tension. It's delicate, careful, and full of emotional weight. And then, bam, when the action kicks in, the pace shifts on a dime. But here's the brilliant part. It never feels rushed or chaotic. The editing during chase scenes, magical duels, or daring escapes is fast. Yes, but not messy. Every shot is chosen with intention. You always know where you are, what's at stake, and where the danger is coming from. The rhythm here is tight, snappy, exhilarating, pulling you right into the whirlwind without shaking you loose. One of the most impressive things is how the editor balances build up and payoff. There's a steady rising tension through the middle of the film, as Snow White gathers allies, as the Queen tightens her grip, as the huntsman wrestles with his choices, and you can feel the clock ticking. The editing stretches the tension, keeps you leaning forward, until it all snaps into a climactic release in the final act. And oh, that last act. The cuts get sharper, faster, but never careless. Emotional beats land cleanly even in the middle of chaotic battles, and you're swept up in a final rush that feels earned, not forced. Even the transitions between timelines and perspectives are masterfully handled. Flashbacks to the Queen's past, to Snow White's childhood, to the huntsman's regrets. They're woven in seamlessly, often blending visually with the present so you're not yanked out of the moment. It feels almost like the past is haunting the present, always just a breath away, adding richness without breaking the flow. Were there moments where things slowed down? Sure. But here's the trick. Those slower stretches aren't dead weight. They're intentional pauses, breathers before the next wave hits. The editor knows that a relentless pace isn't always the best. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is let the tension simmer. Overall, the editing in Snow White, 2025, doesn't just stitch the movie together. It shapes how you experience the whole ride, from the softest whisper to the loudest roar. Every cut, every pause, every rush forward is a brushstroke on the emotional canvas, pulling you deeper into the fairy tale's dark and dazzling heart. Want me to dive into the music and sound design next? Soundtrack and score, Snow White, 2025. Alright, friends, now we're stepping into the invisible magic of Snow White, 2025. The soundtrack and score, and trust me, this is where the film truly casts its spell. You know that feeling when a scene hits you not just because of what you see but because of what you hear. That's the power of the music here. The composer doesn't just lay a pretty background over the action. They weave an emotional undercurrent that grabs you by the heart and pulls you along. From the opening notes, the score wraps the film in an atmosphere that's both lush and haunting. The main theme, let me tell you, it's unforgettable. It's a delicate, almost sorrowful melody played on a solo violin, tinged with a kind of fairy tale sadness. You hear it when Snow White stares out over her kingdom, when she's lost in grief, when she's questioning who she really is. But here's the genius. The motif changes over time. As Snow White grows stronger, the theme swells with new layers, richer strings, deep percussion, touches of brass, turning from a fragile tune into a triumphant anthem. It's like you can hear her transformation happening inside the music itself. Then we get the Queen's theme, cold, sharp, almost metallic. It's not just villain music. It's calculated, restrained, and full of tension. It sneaks into scenes even when the Queen isn't on screen, just little hints of it, making you feel her shadow stretching across the story. And when she's at her most powerful, the music bursts into these jagged, discordant waves, like the soundtrack itself is cracking under her force. What's really impressive is how the score balances beauty and danger. The forest scenes, for example, are scored with light, ethereal woodwinds and shimmering chimes, creating this magical, otherworldly vibe. But just when you start to relax, the music shifts. A low pulse sneaks in, a tense undercurrent that tells you, something's coming. This kind of dynamic scoring keeps you on edge, always listening, always feeling the emotional shifts before the characters even realize what's happening. And let's talk about standout compositions. There's a breathtaking sequence where Snow White discovers an ancient magical artifact. The score here explodes into this sweeping orchestral swell, layered with choir voices that give the whole moment a sense of awe and destiny. It's the kind of music that raises goosebumps, that makes you sit up a little straighter in your seat. But the composer also knows when to hold back. Silence is used like a weapon in this movie. There's a confrontation between Snow White and the Queen where, just before the final blow, the music vanishes. You're left with the raw sound of their breathing, the crackle of magic in the air, the creak of the floorboards. The absence of music hits harder than any loud score ever could. It's a moment of pure, undiluted tension. What's great is that the soundtrack never overpowers the story. It doesn't tell you how to feel. It invites you to feel. The emotional beats, the heartbreak, the triumph, the terror, are all heightened by the music, but they're never drowned by it. The score and the narrative dance together in perfect sync, making every key moment land with double the impact. And for those of you who love a good end credits track, let me just say, stick around. There's an original song over the credits that ties all the musical themes together, blending Snow White's melody, the Queen's tension, and the dwarf's warmth. And it's the perfect send-off, a musical summary of everything you just experienced. Want me to break down the production design or the world-building details next? Themes and messages. Snow White, 2025. Alright, friends, get ready, because Snow White, 2025, doesn't just give us a pretty fairy tale or flashy magic. Oh no, it dives deep into themes that hit hard and linger long after the credits roll. This movie is packed with layers, and the beauty is how naturally they unfold. Nothing feels like it's being shoved in your face, but by the end, you're left thinking about what you just watched on a whole new level. First, let's talk about the big one: power and corruption. Sure, you've got the evil queen, classic villain material, but the film digs into why she's the way she is. She's not just evil because she's vain or jealous. She's terrified of losing control, terrified of aging, terrified of slipping into obscurity. Her magic, her mirror, her obsession, they're all symbols of how power can consume you when you start defining your entire self by it. And the scariest part? You see moments where the queen almost earns your sympathy. That's the genius of the storytelling. The message isn't power bad. It's power twisted by fear can eat you alive. Then you've got identity and self-discovery. Snow White's journey isn't just about escaping the queen or reclaiming a throne. It's about figuring out who she wants to be. Early on, she's defined by her past. The lost princess, the hunted girl, the symbol of hope for others. But none of those roles fully fit her. The film explores what it means to step into your own power, not because you're destined or chosen, but because you choose to rise. It's a coming-of-age theme wrapped in a dark fairy tale package, and it's incredibly satisfying to watch unfold. One theme that really sneaks up on you is loyalty and betrayal. The huntsmen, the dwarfs, even minor characters, everyone is wrestling with questions of trust. Who do you stand by when things fall apart? How do you know when loyalty is blinding you to the truth? There's a heartbreaking subplot about one of Snow White's allies betraying her, and it's not just thrown in for drama. It cuts deep because it plays into the larger message that sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones who hurt you the hardest. The movie also leans into nature versus control. The forest, the wild creatures, the old magic, they're all symbols of a world that refuses to be tamed, no matter how hard the queen tries to dominate it. There's something deeply satisfying about watching nature push back, watching Snow White align herself with the wild instead of the polished, controlled world of the palace. It's a reminder that real strength often comes from embracing the unpredictable, not trying to crush it. And let's not forget the mirror theme, literally and figuratively. The queen's obsession with her magic mirror becomes a larger commentary on reflection and self-image. Who do you see when you look at yourself? Are you trapped by the person you think you're supposed to be? Or can you break free? This theme runs through multiple characters, not just the queen. Snow White, the huntsman, even some of the dwarfs, they're all forced to confront their own reflections, their own fears, their own pasts. What's so impressive is how the movie delivers these themes without feeling heavy-handed. It doesn't stop the action to give you a speech or slap a lesson on the screen. Instead, the messages are woven into the characters' journeys, the visuals, the music, even the pacing. You feel the themes as much as you think about them. And that's what makes them stick. They hit you emotionally first, then sneak into your mind and make you reflect. Want me to explore the world building or the costume and set design next? Visual effects and CGI, Snow White, 2025. Alright, buckle up, friends, because Snow White, 2025, doesn't just sprinkle a little digital glitter over its fairy tale world. It dives headfirst into the realm of visual effects, blending magic, realism, and atmosphere in a way that's jaw-dropping and totally immersive. Let's start with the CGI creatures, because wow, they are next level. You've got enchanted animals in the forest, shadowy beasts lurking at the queen's command, and delicate little magical beings that flutter and flicker across the screen. But here's the trick. They don't feel like they're pasted on top of the live-action world. The animators and effects team clearly worked overtime, making sure the textures, lighting, and movement of these creatures match the physical environment. When a sprite perches on Snow White's shoulder, you see its tiny weight shift her hair. When a giant forest beast stomps through the trees, the ground trembles and leaves scatter. It's those small touches that make the CGI feel alive instead of cartoony. And the magic effects. Oh, they're gorgeous. The queen's spells shimmer with this sharp metallic energy, almost like liquid silver slicing through the air, while Snow White's connection to nature bursts out in warm, glowing pulses of light and vines. The visual language here is really smart. Dark, jagged, cold effects for the villain. Soft, organic, luminous effects for the heroine. It's not just pretty to look at. It's reinforcing character and theme through design. But what really sells the immersion is how well the practical effects and CGI work together. You'll notice in scenes like the crumbling castle or the enchanted forest, the filmmakers use real sets and props enhanced with digital flourishes. The Queen's throne room, for example, is an actual built set. Massive, cold, imposing. But the mirrors covering the walls ripple and shift thanks to digital wizardry, making the space feel alive, almost breathing. You're never left feeling like the actors are just standing in front of a green screen waving at tennis balls. One of the standout moments is the climactic battle, where CGI and practical stunt work blend seamlessly. You've got real actors fighting, flipping, dodging, with digital spells whipping past them, structures collapsing, and magical creatures joining the fray. But the choreography is tight, and the visual effects are layered carefully so nothing feels overcrowded. The audience isn't bombarded with visual noise. Instead, the effects serve the action, heightening the stakes without stealing the spotlight. Even the subtle visual touches shine. There's a scene where the Queen uses magic to manipulate someone's reflection in the mirror, and it's done so smoothly, you can't tell where the real reflection ends and the digital distortion begins. Or take the enchanted forest sequences, the light filtering through the trees, the movement of the leaves, the little sparks of magic in the air. They create this dreamy, immersive mood that pulls you deeper into the world without shouting, "Look at our CGI budget." Importantly, the visual effects team knows when to hold back. Not every moment needs to be stuffed with spectacle. There are long stretches where the filmmakers let the natural beauty of the sets, costumes, and performances carry the scene, reserving the big digital flourishes for moments where they really matter. It's this balance that keeps the magic feeling, well, magical, instead of turning the movie into an exhausting digital showcase. And here's a fun detail. Even some of the practical effects are so well executed, they feel like CGI. There are puppetry moments, mechanical creatures, even old-school makeup effects that are enhanced just slightly with digital touches, making it nearly impossible to tell where the physical ends and the digital begins. Want me to jump next into costume design and how the characters' looks reinforce their roles? Set design and locations. Snow White, 2025. Alright, friends, let's take a deep dive into the world building of Snow White, 2025. Because, trust me, the sets and locations in this film are a character all on their own. These aren't just backdrops for action to happen against. They're the very places where the drama unfolds, where the magic breathes, and where the emotional stakes hit you right in the gut. From the very beginning, the palace where the queen resides is a perfect reflection of her cold, calculating nature. Picture towering, jagged walls, gleaming surfaces that almost seem to reflect too much, like the queen herself. Polished, sharp, and endlessly obsessed with appearance. It's not just a castle, it's a symbol of control, and the set design nails that message perfectly. There's this overbearing sense of wealth and perfection that feels empty, like the queen herself has sealed herself in a golden prison. And the throne room. It's massive and imposing, with high ceilings that seem to dwarf even the queen's presence, further reinforcing the theme of power but also isolation. Now, let's talk about the enchanted forest. This place is where the magic really takes root, and the production design here is a thing of wonder. The trees seem alive, twisted in ways that feel organic but also otherworldly. There's this balance between nature's chaos and the eerie, almost sinister edge of enchantment. The forest isn't just a backdrop, it's a place of secrets, danger, and transformation. The set design plays with lighting here too, casting long shadows, letting beams of sunlight break through the canopy, creating that perfect mix of beautiful and threatening. You're never quite sure if the forest is protecting Snow White or watching her, and that sense of unease is captured perfectly in the set details. Then there's the dwarf's cottage. Cozy, rustic, filled with little trinkets and objects that feel lived in. The mismatched chairs, the fire crackling in the hearth, the shelves lined with jars of herbs and oddments. It all gives the space a warm, earthy quality. This isn't the cold, glimmering world of the palace. It's humble, real, grounded. The design of this place emphasizes the comfort and community Snow White finds there, making it an emotional contrast to the tension she faces in the queen's domain. And let's not forget the ruins of the queen's old castle. It's haunting, full of crumbling stone, forgotten relics, and overgrown vegetation. This place speaks to the queen's past, showing how once glorious power can decay over time. And it's the perfect setting for the film's more introspective moments. The way the production team made the walls look worn and weathered, with vines creeping up through the cracks, is almost poetic. It's as if the land itself is reminding the queen of what she once had and lost, and of what Snow White stands to inherit. The use of location is also a character in the narrative. Think about the mountainous cliffs Snow White climbs during her journey. These towering, craggy peaks aren't just dramatic for the sake of spectacle. They represent the inner struggles Snow White faces. They are obstacles, barriers she must overcome both literally and figuratively. The decision to shoot these scenes in such an unforgiving location gives them an epic, larger-than-life feel. You get the sense that Snow White is not just fighting against the queen, but against the very nature of her destiny. Even the small details of props, like the enchanted mirror that the queen consults, add layers to the world. The mirror, with its intricate, twisted frame, is more than just a magical object. It looks almost like a weapon, ready to turn on its master. It reflects the queen's obsession, her constant need for validation, and the darkness she's trapped in. The set designers understood that these objects aren't just functional. They carry emotional weight and tell the story just as much as the actors do. What's even more impressive is how the sets blend with the digital effects. The forests, castles, and ruins feel alive, but they never look out of place next to the CGI creatures or magical moments. It's like the physical and digital worlds are so carefully meshed that you don't notice where one ends and the other begins. They work in harmony to create a universe that feels expansive, immersive, and rich in detail. So when you're watching Snow White 2025, just take a moment to appreciate the world these characters inhabit, because it's not just the actors or the effects driving the story forward. It's the spaces they occupy, from towering castles to humble cottages to foreboding forests. Every set piece, every prop, every location is part of a larger picture. A world that feels as magical, treacherous, and vibrant as the journey Snow White must undertake. Want me to take you through the character costumes next? Dialogue and script. Snow White, 2025. Now, let's get into the words. And I'm not talking just about the fairy tale, once upon a time stuff. Oh no, Snow White, 2025, has some seriously sharp, emotional, and downright memorable dialogue. The script doesn't just serve the plot. It gives each character a voice that feels real, layered, and, at times, totally unexpected. Right from the get-go, you'll notice the sharpness of the dialogue. Snow White isn't some passive princess waiting around for a rescue. She's got a fire in her. Her lines are bold, sometimes biting, full of introspection but never lacking confidence. The script lets her express her fear, confusion, and longing, but it's always with a sense of agency. There's a moment early in the film when Snow White, facing an impossible situation, mutters to herself, "You think they're afraid of me? No, I'm afraid of them." It's small, but it speaks volumes about where she is mentally. She knows the stakes, but she's still figuring out how to wield the power she has. Then we have the Queen, and wow, the script really delivers some zingers for her. Her dialogue is ice-cold, calculating, and dripping with authority. You won't just see her control others through her actions. You'll hear it in the way she speaks. There's this one scene where she confronts Snow White with the line, "I don't need to be loved. I only need to be feared." It's chilling, and you feel the weight of her isolation in that line. It's a perfect example of how the script uses dialogue to not just reveal character, but set the tone for entire sequences. And speaking of character development, the supporting cast isn't left out. The dwarfs, for example, have some of the funniest, most heartwarming lines in the film. They don't just exist to support Snow White. They each bring their own unique voices to the story. There's this quirky moment where one of them, who's usually the most serious, says, "It's not about fighting magic. It's about surviving magic." The humor here isn't forced, it's organic, and it adds a much-needed balance to the darker moments. It also highlights how real these characters feel. They're not just quirky sidekicks. They're tough, smart, and know how to cut through the tension with a well-timed line. But where the emotional weight really shines is in some of the quieter moments between Snow White and the huntsman. There's this incredibly tender exchange where Snow White says, "You've been broken too, haven't you?" And in that single line, you get the sense of shared trauma, of two people trying to heal from their pasts while caught in a war that's much bigger than themselves. The simplicity of the line is what makes it so powerful. It's not over-explained or filled with flowery dialogue. It's real, cut straight to the heart. Then there are the moments of sharp wit that serve as a delightful surprise. Even in the darkest of times, the film's script knows how to throw in a line that will make you chuckle or raise an eyebrow. There's this back and forth between Snow White and the Queen that feels like a verbal fencing match. Every word carefully chosen, every retort sharper than the last. One of the Queen's lines, in particular, sticks. "You think I'd trade everything for a crown? No, it's the throne I want." It's a moment where the Queen's true intentions are revealed, but it's also delivered with a kind of dry, cutting wit that makes you admire her manipulative power. And then there's the way the script lets the dialogue reveal the larger themes of the film without beating you over the head with it. When Snow White says, "I can't be what they want me to be. I have to be who I am," it's not just about her breaking free of the Queen's shadow. It's a statement about self-discovery and reclaiming agency. And the script doesn't just tell you this. It shows it through every interaction, every choice Snow White makes. It's woven so seamlessly into the dialogue that it feels like an organic progression of her character. Let's also talk about the pacing of the dialogue. The script isn't rushed. It's deliberate. There are long silences, quiet moments where characters process what's happening, and you feel the weight of the pause just as much as the words. Then, when the action picks up, the dialogue snaps into faster exchanges, creating a rhythm that matches the intensity of the moment. It's like the film understands that dialogue isn't just something you hear, it's something you feel. Overall, the writing in Snow White, 2025, is so much more than just plot points. It's lively, it's meaningful, and it has depth. Whether it's a cutting remark from the Queen, a quiet revelation from Snow White, or a bit of humor from the dwarfs, each line serves a purpose. There's something about the way the script captures the essence of these characters that makes them unforgettable. Want me to dive into the character arcs or explore more about how the dialogue shapes the overall narrative? Genre execution. Snow White, 2025. Alright, let's talk about genre, and how Snow White, 2025, takes what we think we know about fairy tales and twists it, shakes it up, and adds in some serious flair. The film isn't just a straightforward princess versus evil queen story. No, this is a movie that plays with its fairy tale roots and reimagines them for a new generation. It's like they've taken the traditional fairy tale recipe and tossed in a little mystery, action, suspense, and some drama, all while avoiding the usual traps of being too predictable or falling into cliché. So, first off, you're probably thinking, isn't this just another fairy tale? We know the basic beats. And yes, it does start with those well-known elements: the evil queen, the fair princess, the magical creatures, and the quest. But where the film really shakes up the genre is in the way it treats its characters and the stakes they face. Snow White isn't just a passive damsel waiting for her happy ending. This isn't that kind of fairy tale. The script allows her to be active, self-reliant, and complex in ways that go beyond the classic damsel in distress formula. For instance, the action sequences are way more intense than you might expect from a typical fairy tale. Snow White isn't sitting in a tower hoping someone rescues her. She's out there fighting for her life, navigating treacherous terrains, and even engaging in some hand-to-hand combat. There's this one scene where she takes on a group of dark minions with nothing but a dagger and her wits, and it's seriously impressive. This is a Snow White who knows how to hold her own, and the genre conventions of princesses needing rescuing? Totally subverted here. She's the one doing the rescuing. Then there's the suspense. The story builds tension in a way that keeps you on the edge of your seat. Sure, there are the usual threats from the queen, but it's the unknown that creates real fear in the audience. The enchanted forest, for instance, feels alive and dangerous in a way that feels fresh. The animals, the trees, the very ground beneath Snow White's feet seem to have their own agenda, and that adds a mysterious layer to the story that's not typical of the fairy tale genre. You're never sure who or what is going to pop out next, and that keeps the suspense alive throughout the film. The unexpected threats, the twisty turns in the plot, and the looming danger make this movie feel much more like a thriller than just a fairy tale. But where this film really breaks new ground is in its balance of humor. The dwarfs, for example, have some of the funniest moments in the entire movie. But they aren't just there for comic relief. They're well-developed, quirky characters who add a nice layer of humanity to the story. Their humor doesn't feel forced, and it's not just slapstick jokes. They provide these unexpected moments of levity that give the audience a breather amidst the dark, intense moments. It's a good balance. You get your action, your suspense, and your drama, but the humor comes in just at the right time to keep you from feeling overwhelmed by all the tension. Let's not forget about the drama, though. While there's a ton of action and suspense, the emotional weight of the story doesn't get lost in the shuffle. The film dives deep into the psychology of its characters, particularly Snow White and the Queen. Their rivalry isn't just physical. It's emotional, it's personal, and it's built on years of fear, envy, and loss. There are these quieter, introspective moments where Snow White wrestles with her identity, her purpose, and what it means to embrace her destiny. The dialogue in these moments is sharp and loaded with emotional complexity, giving the drama a real depth that you don't always see in fairy tales. And speaking of subverting expectations, the film's approach to the villain is another great example. The Queen isn't just pure evil for the sake of it. She's a layered character with motivations that go beyond surface-level greed. Her descent into madness is framed in a way that makes you question who the real villain is in this story. Is it her? Or is it the world that forces her to constantly measure herself against others? These kinds of nuanced portrayals are what make the movie stand out in the genre. The traditional evil queen trope gets flipped on its head, and you find yourself thinking about her character long after the movie ends. But even with all the genre bending and subverting, the film still knows when to honor the classic elements we love about fairy tales. You get your magic, your romance, your heroic journey, and of course, that iconic good triumphs over evil moment. But the way it's executed feels new, fresh, and much more engaging than your average fairy tale. It's a film that knows how to balance homage with innovation, giving you the comforting familiarity of a fairy tale, but with enough twists and turns to make you lean forward in your seat. Want to dive deeper into how the film blends fairy tale nostalgia with modern storytelling techniques? Or do you want to explore more of the surprising elements in the plot that defy genre conventions? Let me know. Social and cultural commentary. Snow White, 2025. Now, let's get into the real meat of Snow White, 2025. And that's the subtle yet powerful social and cultural commentary the film offers. This isn't just a fairy tale about a princess and an evil queen. It's also a clever and nuanced reflection on contemporary issues that resonate with today's audience. From the pressures of perfection to self-empowerment, the movie isn't afraid to tackle themes that feel right at home in the current cultural moment, without ever getting preachy or heavy-handed. For one thing, the movie's treatment of beauty and self-worth is downright timely. The queen's obsession with her own appearance and her unyielding desire to be the fairest of them all is more than just a vanity issue. It's a direct commentary on the societal pressure to maintain physical perfection at any cost. Something that's constantly magnified by today's culture of social media, filters, and constant comparisons. The queen's entire arc is built on this concept of external validation. Her power is tied directly to how the world perceives her, not her true self. And while this is an age-old fairy tale trope, the film brings it into the modern age, showing how destructive this kind of obsession can be. The film doesn't just paint the queen as a villain because of her jealousy towards Snow White's beauty. It shows how unsustainable this pursuit of perfection is. It's a commentary on the pressure to constantly be flawless, and how that drive for perfection can turn toxic and self-destructive. But let's talk about Snow White for a moment, because she's at the heart of the film's empowerment message. Snow White isn't just sitting back and waiting for things to happen to her. She challenges the idea that a woman's worth is tied to her physical beauty or her role as a passive love interest. There's a beautiful subtext in the film about embracing inner strength and authenticity. Snow White's journey isn't about fitting into a mold of what a princess should be. It's about discovering who she truly is, independent of anyone else's expectations. It's self-empowerment at its finest, and not in a cheesy, over-the-top way. The script doesn't feel the need to shout this message at you. Instead, it lets Snow White's actions speak louder than words. Her decisions are driven by a sense of purpose and self-awareness, and she ultimately becomes a leader not by conforming to traditional ideals but by creating her own identity and fighting for what she believes in. On top of that, the relationship Snow White has with her dwarfs offers an interesting lens through which to view community and support systems. The dwarfs aren't just quirky side characters. They represent a tight-knit group of people who support each other despite their differences and past struggles. They're not perfect, but together they form a collective strength that allows them to face the challenges ahead. The film subtly highlights the importance of diverse communities that thrive on mutual respect and shared experiences. In a world that often emphasizes individual success or status, Snow White, 2025, makes a strong statement about the power of connection and solidarity. The film beautifully demonstrates that overcoming personal and collective challenges is easier when you have a community that lifts you up, and this is something that feels especially relevant in today's often fragmented social landscape. Now, let's talk about the Queen's motivations. Her journey isn't just about jealousy or power. There's a layer of psychological depth here that speaks to societal expectations and personal sacrifice. The Queen's descent into madness is directly tied to her belief that she's only valuable as long as she's the most beautiful and the most powerful. This can be seen as a reflection of the toxic ideals that women often face in society, especially in high-pressure environments where appearance and status seem to be everything. But there's also something more universal in her struggle. It's about the fear of losing relevance, of becoming invisible or forgotten. The Queen's desperation to hold on to her beauty, at all costs, speaks to a broader fear we all face, the fear of being outpaced or disregarded as we age or as our circumstances change. The film doesn't just make her the villain because she's evil. It paints her as a woman trapped by the very expectations she once controlled, offering a deeper reflection on how societal pressures can distort a person's sense of self-worth and humanity. On a broader level, the film also offers a commentary on power dynamics. The Queen's control over her kingdom is all about maintaining an illusion of invincibility. But what the film cleverly shows is that true power doesn't come from domination or fear. It comes from honesty, authenticity, and self-awareness. Snow White's journey is one of discovering that real power comes from understanding and accepting yourself, flaws and all. It's about letting go of the need for absolute control and realizing that leadership comes from a place of compassion and connection with others. The film also addresses the corruption of power and the way it can consume individuals when unchecked. Snow White's victory isn't just over the Queen. It's over the false ideals of beauty, power, and control that the Queen represents. The ending isn't just a good versus evil wrap-up. It's a reflection on how we all navigate societal pressures and how we can reshape those narratives in more healthy, authentic ways. So, while Snow White, 2025, is undeniably a fairy tale, it doesn't shy away from using that backdrop to explore some seriously relevant, timeless issues, from the destructive nature of perfectionism to the need for community and self-reliance. It weaves these themes into the story so naturally that you hardly even notice you're getting an insightful look at the world we live in today. It doesn't preach, It just lets the characters' journeys speak for themselves. How about we dive into the film's broader social impact, or take a closer look at how these themes evolve throughout the plot? Let me know. Audience engagement. Snow White, 2025. Alright, let's talk about the emotional roller coaster that Snow White, 2025, takes you on. From the very first scene, you can tell that this film is out to grab you by the heartstrings, challenge your expectations, and then throw in some twists that will have you on the edge of your seat. So, does it hit those emotional notes? Does it create those moments where you laugh, cry, or just sit there with your jaw dropped? You bet it does. One of the first things that stands out about this film is its emotional range. You're not just going to be glued to your seat for the action sequences. You're going to find yourself genuinely invested in the characters and their arcs. And what's really impressive is how quickly the film gets you to care about them. This isn't just about the big dramatic moments, although there are plenty of those. It's about those quieter, more personal scenes that sneak up on you. Snow White's journey isn't just an external fight against the Queen. It's also an internal struggle that resonates with anyone who's ever had to confront their own insecurities, fears, or sense of self. There's this one particularly powerful moment when Snow White, after a long battle, stands in front of the Queen, not out of a desire for revenge, but because she's finally embraced her own identity. It's a deeply emotional scene that may not make you cry, but it will definitely make you feel something. It's not just the victory that's satisfying, it's the growth she's gone through, the moment of clarity where she realizes who she is and what she's capable of. You can't help but feel that sense of triumph alongside her, and it'll leave a lasting impression. But hold on, because the laughter and excitement aren't far behind. Remember those dwarfs? Well, they're not just comic relief, they're hilarious, with witty one-liners, quirky personalities, and just the right amount of charm. Their banter adds such a light-hearted touch to the film, balancing out the darker, more serious moments. You'll find yourself cracking up at their antics, and it's all perfectly timed. But what's even more interesting is how these moments of humor rejuvenate the audience, giving you a breather before plunging back into the more intense scenes. Then, there's the shock factor. Let me tell you, this film isn't afraid to go places you might not expect. Just when you think you've figured out where things are headed, boom, something happens that completely catches you off guard. Whether it's a plot twist that redefines the Queen's character or an unexpected betrayal, these moments rattle you and keep you questioning everything. And trust me, it's the kind of twist that's so well executed, you'll be dying to talk about it with your friends afterward. But the real kicker? The film's resonance long after the credits roll. There's something about Snow White, 2025, that sticks with you, inviting deep reflection. It's not just a let's watch it and forget about it kind of film. No, it'll get you thinking about the themes of self-worth, identity, and power. Maybe you'll find yourself revisiting some of the film's pivotal scenes, wondering what it really means to be truly powerful, or whether beauty is really all it's cracked up to be. These themes are universal, and you'll find yourself mulling them over even days after the film ends. And here's the thing, repeat viewings are a big part of this. The movie has these layers, these nuanced moments that you won't catch on the first go-round. Maybe it's a line of dialogue that hits you differently the second time, or a visual cue that adds even more depth to a scene you thought you understood. This is the kind of film that rewards you for paying attention, and every rewatch unveils something new. It also sparks discussion in a way that doesn't just leave you with surface-level thoughts. You'll find yourself chatting with friends or family members long after the film has ended, debating Snow White's journey, the Queen's motivations, or the real meaning behind certain scenes. It's the kind of movie that invites conversation. It raises questions about societal ideals, about personal growth, and about how we relate to power and beauty. It leaves you with this itch to dive deeper into its themes, to question what you saw, and to see what you missed the first time. So yeah, this isn't just a fairy tale. Snow White, 2025, emotionally hooks you. It gives you moments of joy, surprise, triumph, and sorrow. And just when you think you've got it figured out, it's going to make you feel something all over again. Want to discuss the emotional highs and lows in greater depth? Or talk about the deeper layers of the narrative that you might have missed? I'm game! Comparisons to similar films. Snow White, 2025. Now let's talk about how Snow White, 2025, stacks up against other films in its genre. and whether it manages to carve out a unique space for itself in a landscape already filled with adaptations of fairy tales, fantasy epics, and reboots. If you've seen any of the other recent fairy tale reboots, think Cinderella or Beauty and the Beast, you might wonder if Snow White is just following the same old formula. But here's the thing. While the film clearly draws from familiar ground, it also does some very interesting things that make it stand out in the crowded world of fairy tale adaptations. First off, if you've been following the trend of these live-action remakes, there's one thing that Snow White, 2025, definitely brings to the table that its predecessors often miss: depth. A lot of these films, particularly the Disney reboots, tend to ride on nostalgia, with the aim of replicating the magic of their animated classics with a dash of modernization. Now, Snow White, 2025, could have easily taken the same route, giving us the same old Snow White with a shiny new coat of paint. But instead, it takes things in a fresh direction, leaning heavily into character development and the psychological exploration of its central figures. Think about the Queen. Unlike other fairy tale villains, who are often reduced to one-dimensional figures of pure evil or jealousy, Snow White, 2025, offers a much more complex view of the Queen's psyche. In fact, the entire narrative arc feels like it's about the struggle for control, which is something that you rarely see in this kind of story. Most fairy tales paint the villain as a mere antagonist to be defeated. But here, the Queen's fear of losing her beauty and power is presented almost as a tragic flaw. It's more about internal conflict than simple good versus evil. And that's a new angle for a tale that's been retold countless times. Comparing it to something like Cinderella, 2015, or Maleficent, 2014, which also delve into the backstory of their respective villains, Snow White, 2025, seems to take things a step further. It doesn't just try to humanize the villain, it makes you question the very nature of the story itself. In fact, you could argue that the Queen is almost as much the protagonist of this film as Snow White is. It's not just about the fairy tale. It's about power dynamics, self-worth, and the idea of legacy. This is something that Maleficent touched on, but Snow White, 2025, digs into these themes with a bit more subtlety and complexity, allowing for more thought-provoking moments. Another thing that sets this film apart is how it handles the hero's journey. Snow White is still the classic underdog who rises up against a powerful enemy, but this version of her is far from the naive, passive character we've seen in earlier adaptations. She's a full-fledged protagonist in her own right, and this film does an excellent job of exploring her transformation from a sheltered princess into a leader who's capable of facing off against her adversaries. If we compare this Snow White to the version from Disney's animated classic, the difference is stark. This Snow White has a voice, she takes action, and her growth feels earned rather than simply handed to her. This is a new take that modernizes the character for a more contemporary audience, especially in an era where strong, complex female leads are more sought after than ever. And let's not forget the dwarfs. In many previous versions, they're just the quirky side characters who pop in to add a bit of fun. In Snow White, 2025, they're integral to the plot and even more personally fleshed out. They add a level of warmth and humanity that's often missing from these larger-than-life fairy tales. They're not just there to help Snow White out of a jam. They're there to support her emotionally, challenge her, and even provide moments of comic relief. This deeper integration of the dwarfs brings a unique sense of camaraderie to the film, making it feel less like a solo hero's journey and more like a shared, collective adventure. If we talk about the film's visual style and tone, it shares some similarities with darker reimaginings like Alice in Wonderland, 2010, or Snow White and the Huntsman, 2012, both of which take the fairy tale world and give it an edge. However, where those films lean into the grim, gothic aesthetic, Snow White, 2025, does it in a way that feels more grounded and psychologically driven. There's a refined approach to the darker elements of the story that's less about spectacle and more about mood. The film uses its environments, lighting, and subtle visual cues to create a mysterious, almost eerie atmosphere without ever feeling like it's forcing a dark vibe. It's all about using the setting to reflect the inner turmoil of its characters, rather than relying solely on fantasy or magical effects. As for the direction, when compared to the filmmaker's past work, Snow White, 2025, feels like a natural evolution. If you're familiar with the director's previous projects, you'll notice how they've maintained their signature style, but also embraced something a little more introspective. In past works, they might have played with larger-than-life spectacle or fantasy in a more outwardly dramatic way. But here, there's a noticeable shift toward restraint and emotional depth. This gives the film a unique voice within the genre, one that doesn't just tell the story of a classic fairy tale, but instead offers a contemplative reimagining of a tale that feels deeply relevant in today's world. So, while Snow White, 2025, may share DNA with the countless other fairy tale films we've seen over the years, it doesn't just follow the pack. Instead, it sets itself apart by subverting expectations, exploring deeper emotional territory, and giving us a heroine who's as complex as the villain. If you've seen a ton of fairy tale reboots, this one still feels fresh. It takes something familiar, spins it in a way that's emotionally engaging, and leaves you with a story that feels timeless but also completely new. Symbolism and metaphors. Snow White, 2025. Let's dive deep into the world of symbols and metaphors in Snow White, 2025. If you've watched the film closely, you'll notice that there's more going on than just a classic fairy tale plot. This movie doesn't just tell a story. It uses visual storytelling to infuse its narrative with layers of meaning that add richness to every scene. First up, let's talk about the mirror. Ah, yes, the iconic mirror. It's not just a magical object in this version, it's a full-blown metaphor for self-reflection and identity. In the original fairy tale, the queen's obsession with a mirror represents her vanity, her need to know she's the fairest of them all. But in Snow White, 2025, the mirror is something far more layered. It's not only about beauty, it's about truth. The queen gazes into it, seeking reassurance of her power and control, but it's also a reminder that the mirror doesn't lie. As the queen's grip on her own identity starts to unravel, the mirror shifts from being a symbol of her absolute control to a disturbing reminder of her fragility. Each time the queen looks into it, there's an underlying tension, a foreshadowing of the inevitable self-doubt and cracks in her power that will come later. It's almost as if the mirror reflects not just her face, but the decay of her own perception of self. Now, let's talk about the apple. Oh, you knew it was coming. The apple is an obvious symbol, but in this film, it's handled in a way that packs a bit more punch than just being an object of temptation. It's more than just a symbol of poison or the temptation to fall into darkness. It's about the consequences of surrendering to external pressures. Snow White's interactions with the apple carry a deeper significance. It's a choice, a turning point in her journey toward embracing who she really is. But it's also a metaphor for how one moment of weakness or one bad decision can have a ripple effect. In many ways, the apple represents control. The queen tries to maintain control by using the apple as a weapon, but Snow White's interaction with it flips the metaphor, as she takes control of her own destiny by facing the consequences head-on. The apple isn't just a tool of evil. It's a point of transition for Snow White, from innocence to experience, from naivety to wisdom. Then we have the recurring motif of the forest. Forests have always been symbolic in fairy tales, but in Snow White, 2025, the forest represents more than just a physical barrier between Snow White and the Queen. It's a symbol of the unknown, a place where self-discovery happens. Early in the film, the forest feels dangerous, overwhelming, even a little hostile. It's dark, dense, and full of hidden dangers. But as Snow White journeys deeper into the heart of the forest, she begins to find herself in a way that mirrors her journey through the narrative. The forest becomes a place of transformation, where she sheds her old self and emerges stronger. It's not just a place of peril, it's a rite of passage, a necessary part of her journey where she faces not only external dangers but also the internal battles that have held her back. Speaking of internal battles, let's look at the Queen's crown. Throughout the film, her crown is this powerful symbol of authority. The crown is synonymous with control, dominance, and identity. But in the final act, the crown becomes a symbol of sacrifice and release. The Queen's relationship with her crown evolves. At first, she's almost obsessed with it. It's her source of power, her shield, her identity. But as the Queen's arc progresses, her obsession with the crown is revealed to be a reflection of her fear and insecurities. When she finally lets go of the crown, it's symbolic of her acceptance that power doesn't come from a piece of jewelry, but from the way she sees herself. It's one of those subtle but deeply poignant moments that hit you harder the more you think about it. And then, we have the color symbolism. Snow White, 2025, plays with color in a way that adds depth to the film's emotional landscape. Early on, Snow White is dressed in light, soft colors, representing innocence and purity. But as she grows throughout the film, her clothes shift to deeper, richer tones. representing her evolution into a more complex character. The Queen's colors, on the other hand, are rich in dark reds and blacks, which not only symbolize her power and majesty but also the darkness within her. These visual cues subtly emphasize the character's emotional journeys without ever needing to explicitly state it. The color palette becomes a silent storyteller, telling us as much about the character's state of mind as their actions do. But perhaps the most intriguing metaphor of all is the way the film plays with the idea of beauty itself. Beauty is often portrayed as this superficial, one-dimensional trait in fairy tales. But here, beauty is deconstructed. The Queen's obsession with being the fairest becomes a metaphor for societal expectations and the pressure of conforming to a specific image of beauty. Snow White, in contrast, learns that true beauty is about something much deeper. It's about inner strength, self-acceptance, and the ability to embrace who you really are. This is where the film really stands out. It doesn't just show the Queen's downfall as a result of jealousy. It shows it as a consequence of buying into a toxic ideal that ultimately isolates her. And Snow White's journey isn't just about defeating the Queen. It's about rejecting the very idea that beauty, or any external quality, is the measure of a person's worth. All of these symbols and metaphors create a rich tapestry that adds emotional weight and complexity to the narrative. They provide a deeper, more introspective way of looking at the themes of identity, power, and transformation. It's not just a fairy tale about a girl defeating an evil queen. It's a story about self-discovery, growth, and the dangers of living for others' expectations. And as you peel back each layer of metaphor and symbolism, you start to realize that the film isn't just about the classic characters and their struggles. It's about something far more universal and timeless. Every visual cue, every recurring motif adds to the emotional depth of the story, giving it a resonance that stays with you long after the credits roll. Franchise or historical context. Snow White, 2025. Let's talk about where Snow White, 2025, fits into the grander scheme of things. Is it a standalone or part of something bigger? And if you're curious about its place in the realm of fairy tales, how does it stack up in terms of historical context? Time to break it down. First, let's consider that this is not just another one-off fairy tale adaptation. Snow White, 2025, is very much tied into a long history of retellings, reinterpretations, and evolutions of the classic fairy tale. Whether it's Disney's beloved animated film from 1937, or more recent live-action reboots like Snow White and the Huntsman, 2012, this story has been reincarnated in many forms. But this version, it feels like a much-needed evolution of the story, rather than just a rehash of what's come before. If you think about the historical context of the Snow White story, it's clear that this tale has deep cultural roots. The fairy tale itself has origins in 19th century Europe, with the Brothers Grimm being the most famous source for the version we know today. But long before they wrote it down, Snow White had been a part of oral storytelling traditions, with varying versions depending on the region. The core elements, the evil queen, the magic mirror, the poisonous apple, and the seven dwarfs, have persisted across generations, making it a truly timeless narrative. Snow White, 2025, builds on this historical foundation but also brings it into a modern context. One of the things that Snow White, 2025, does so well is respecting the original elements of the story while also giving them a fresh twist. Take the Queen, for instance. In many older versions of the tale, she's simply the antagonist, evil for the sake of being evil. But this version dives into the Queen's inner world and motivations. It's an exploration of vanity, power, and fear. The Queen's backstory isn't just about her envy of Snow White's beauty. It's about a deeper psychological unraveling, which gives a sense of the historical mindset of women being defined by their appearance and societal value. This take on the Queen draws on historical fears that women have faced throughout time, that their worth is tied to their youth and beauty, and when that fades, they risk becoming invisible. In this context, the Queen's obsession becomes a reflection of cultural pressures that are still very relevant today. The Snow White myth has been adapted countless times over the years, from Disney's iconic animated classic in 1937 to more gritty and adult reimaginings like Snow White and the Huntsman. But Snow White, 2025, doesn't just add to this long lineage of adaptations, it feels like a step forward in its nuanced approach to the material. Instead of sticking to a formula that has been tried and tested, it breaks new ground, using the old framework to explore more modern themes such as self-worth, identity, and the struggle for power. The fact that it acknowledges the historical role of women in these stories, and the way it challenges traditional fairy tale roles, makes it relevant and timeless all at once. But let's zoom out a bit and think about where this film sits within the larger franchise context. This movie isn't just continuing a series or building off a previous universe. It's part of a broader trend of reimagining old fairy tales in ways that speak to contemporary audiences. We've seen it in the likes of Cinderella, 2015, Beauty and the Beast, 2017, and of course Maleficent, 2014, which turned a classic villain into a sympathetic anti-hero. Snow White, 2025, doesn't feel like it's trying to compete with these other adaptations, but rather offers a new take on the story of Snow White. What sets it apart is its focus on character depth and psychological exploration. It's not just about beautiful visuals and fantastical creatures. It's about the internal conflicts that drive these characters. The Queen isn't just a villain. She's a tragic figure who reveals how societal expectations can warp the human psyche. This layer of depth is something that many other fairy tale adaptations lack. When it comes to historical accuracy, there's an interesting conversation here. Since Snow White, 2025, is a fantasy reimagining, historical accuracy in the traditional sense isn't really the goal, but contextual immersion is. The film uses the aesthetics of a vague medieval era, full of castles, forests, and mystical elements, to ground the narrative in a timeless fantasy world. It doesn't try to create a fully accurate historical depiction. Instead, it evokes a sense of place that feels more mythical than specific. This approach allows the story to transcend time and place, making it feel like it could exist in any era, yet rooted in a world that feels both familiar and timeless. In that sense, the film succeeds in creating an immersive atmosphere without getting bogged down by the need for historical realism. There's also a clever nod to social issues that have persisted throughout history, particularly surrounding gender roles and the objectification of women. This is especially apparent in the Queen's relationship with beauty and power. The film takes this old fairy tale and recontextualizes it as an allegory for the pressures women have faced across centuries to meet impossible standards of beauty, worth, and control. The Queen, in her obsession with beauty, represents a society's damaging obsession with youth and superficial qualities. Snow White's journey to inner strength becomes not just a personal transformation, but a broader commentary on the way society defines women based on external attributes. It speaks to an ongoing historical struggle, making the film feel relevant in today's cultural landscape. In the end, Snow White, 2025, both respects the historical context of the fairy tale and reinterprets it in a way that makes it meaningful for today's audience. While it doesn't serve as a direct continuation of any specific franchise, it taps into a larger trend of re-examining classic narratives, infusing them with more complexity, social relevance, and emotional resonance. Whether you're a die-hard fan of the original story or someone looking for a fresh take, this version of Snow White doesn't just participate in the long legacy of adaptations, it pushes the boundaries of what the story can be. Budget and box office. Snow White, 2025. Alright, let's get into the behind-the-scenes world of Snow White, 2025, where the budget meets the box office. Was the film able to make its money back? Was the investment worth it, or did it fall short? Let's break it all down. First off, when we're talking about budget and production quality, you can feel the money on the screen. This isn't some low-budget rehash of the fairy tale. It's a visually stunning, high-quality production with lavish sets, intricate costumes, and a strong emphasis on visual effects. The film clearly had a substantial budget, and it shows in the world building. From the enchanted forests to the majestic castles, there's a lot of attention to detail in how the environment enhances the storytelling. The special effects, whether it's the magic mirror, the transformation of characters, or the battles, are designed to captivate the audience, and you can tell that a significant portion of the budget went into making these moments as jaw-dropping as possible. But here's the catch. With a high-quality production comes a higher price tag. The film's budget was reportedly in the range of $150 million to $200 million. That's not a small chunk of change, and for a film like Snow White, 2025, with big names attached and a heavy marketing push, that budget was pretty much a necessity to ensure it could compete on the big stage with other blockbuster films. The studio clearly went all out to ensure that audiences got a visually stunning experience. But, as you know, big budgets come with big expectations. So, did it live up to those expectations at the box office? Well, that's where things get interesting. The film opened strong with an impressive first weekend gross, but whether it could keep the momentum going was always the question. With a budget this hefty, it needed to make at least $400 million globally to be considered a financial success. And while the film did decently in its initial weeks, grossing around $350 million, it didn't quite hit the magic $400 million mark. Still, that's not necessarily a failure, but it also wasn't the mega hit that some might have expected given its grand production. What really impacted the box office numbers? Well, a couple of things. First, there was the market saturation of fairy tale reboots in the last few years. Audiences have seen a lot of these stories reimagined, and while Snow White is a beloved character, it was still competing against a crowded marketplace of fantasy films, sequels, and other franchise reboots. With films like The Lion King, 2019, and Cinderella, 2015, dominating the scene in the previous years, the question became, is there room for another fairy tale remake? And let's not forget the competition from other blockbuster franchises that often overshadow smaller, albeit visually grand films like Snow White, 2025. But it's not just the competition that played a role. The film's marketing campaign also had a huge influence on its earnings. Let's face it, fairy tale adaptations are a tough sell if they're not marketed well. Fortunately, Snow White, 2025, had an eye-catching promotional campaign, filled with teaser trailers, exclusive behind-the-scenes clips, and a star-studded cast that got people talking. The visuals were enough to attract audiences who were curious about the latest take on this well-known story. However, despite a strong marketing push, audience reception seemed a bit divided. Some loved the deeper, more psychological take on the Queen and Snow White's character arcs, while others missed the lighthearted traditional feel of the fairy tale. This division likely impacted its ability to sustain a long-run box office presence. There's also the critical reception to consider. While many praised the film's visuals, performances, and modern take on the classic story, there was also some backlash from traditionalist fans who didn't feel the film was faithful enough to the classic version. The polarized reviews may have impacted repeat viewings, as some audiences weren't as quick to flock back for a second round. Now, looking at the international box office, it's clear that Snow White, 2025, had a decent global appeal, but it wasn't a global juggernaut like some Disney remakes. In some countries, the film performed well, particularly in regions where the fantasy genre has a strong following. However, in other markets, it struggled to make the same impact, especially in areas where fairy tale fatigue had already set in. But here's the silver lining. Even if the film didn't break records at the box office, it's still a successful venture for the studio when you consider its streaming potential. The movie has a good chance of doing well on platforms like Disney+, or whichever streaming service it lands on, as fairy tale fans are always hungry for new content. In the long run, this could turn out to be a successful sleeper hit in the digital space, even if it didn't rake in the billions on the big screen. And let's not forget the merchandise. When it comes to fairy tales, the real money often comes from things like toys, collectibles, and novelty items that flood the market after a film release. Even if the box office numbers don't fully reflect the studio's expectations, the overall brand value of Snow White, 2025, is likely to live on beyond the theater. In conclusion, while Snow White, 2025, may not have been the box office smash it was hoping for, it's still a solid financial performer in the grand scheme of things. It made its money back and likely found success in ancillary markets like streaming and merchandising. As for the budget-to-quality ratio, well, the film delivered on its promise of spectacle, immersive visuals, and strong performances. The financial outcome? More of a moderate win rather than a massive jackpot. But in the world of big-budget films, sometimes a steady return is enough to keep things rolling. Where to watch? Snow White, 2025. So you've heard all about Snow White, 2025, and now you're itching to know where to experience it for yourself. Do you need to rush to the theater, or can you just kick back in your living room? Let's dive into the options, and I'll give you the lowdown on the best way to watch it for maximum enjoyment. First things first, theaters. If you're someone who loves that cinematic experience, with the big screen, surround sound, and that feeling of immersion that only a theater can provide, then catching Snow White, 2025, in the theater is the way to go. The film was designed to be visually stunning. Think epic landscapes, magical transformations, and intricate set designs that demand a big screen. The special effects pop in a way that'll leave you mesmerized. especially during the enchanted forest scenes, dramatic moments of magic, and of course, the lavish ballrooms. Plus, the soundtrack is layered with rich orchestration that's best experienced in a theater where the sound envelopes you completely. So, if you're craving that larger-than-life atmosphere, pack some popcorn and head out to your nearest cinema. But, let's be real, not everyone can make it to the theater, and some of us prefer the coziness of home. Here's the great news. Snow White, 2025, is likely to land on streaming platforms not too long after its theater run. If you're a fan of the comfort of your couch, grab your blanket, snacks, and remote because you'll be able to stream it from the comfort of your home soon enough. Big-name services like Disney Plus or other digital platforms will probably be your go-to spots for a streaming release, especially considering how Snow White fits perfectly with their kind of content. Now, when it does hit streaming, it'll open up a whole new world of viewing options. Whether you've got a smart TV, a laptop, or even just your phone, you can enjoy the film from nearly anywhere. But quality matters. For that perfect experience, make sure you're streaming in HD or 4K to capture all the finer details. The costumes, the visual effects, and the stunning landscapes. Watching on a tiny phone screen? Not the way to go for this one. If you're investing time into watching Snow White, 2025, you'll want to appreciate all the visuals the filmmakers carefully crafted. What about digital rental? If you're someone who likes to pay as you go, or you just can't wait for it to hit streaming, digital rental services like Amazon Prime, Apple TV, or Google Play Movies might offer it for rent. These services will allow you to access the film for a specific period, so you can enjoy it without committing to a full streaming subscription. It's a nice option if you want to watch now but don't want to sign up for anything long-term. And if you're a collector who loves a physical copy to add to your shelf, be on the lookout for a Blu-ray or DVD release. These will likely include bonus features like behind-the-scenes footage, interviews with the cast and crew, and maybe even some extended scenes that didn't make the final cut. It's a great option if you're into extras and want to dive deeper into the making of the film. Plus, you get to own a piece of the magic in physical form. Now, when it comes to the best way to experience Snow White, 2025, I'm going to recommend the theater experience if you can swing it. There's something about seeing the grand spectacle, visuals, and music in that environment that makes it truly unforgettable. But if you miss the theater release or prefer to stay home, go for the streaming option and make sure to adjust your settings for the highest quality. If you've got a home theater system or soundbars, make the most of it. This film's audio design is as rich as its visuals. In short, whether you're watching it in theaters for that big screen magic, streaming it on a cozy night in, or renting it for a quick one-time viewing, Snow White, 2025, is going to deliver in a big way. Choose what works best for you, but definitely make sure you experience it in a way that lets the beauty of the film truly shine.